a critical partnership, collaborative research for the International Conference on Basic Education, sponsored by the Enlighten Group for Quality and Excellence in Education, July 6, 2019, Baguio City, Philippines. Hi, this is Dr. Davis, and I am very happy to be your resource speaker for this conference on basic education. My presentation is dealing with a critical partnership, and that partnership is the partnership between teacher education professors, higher ed, and K-12 teachers, and how this partnership results in a collaborative opportunity to conduct research. And I think that historically we have not had the partnership between higher ed and K-12 teachers when it comes to research, simply because the doors to that opportunity have been closed. And it's because I think we have this idea that, and this is especially higher ed, that we're different than K-12 teachers. What we do is different. We are preparing future teachers. We are preparing scholars. And so maybe there's a little pride that's involved, but most often I think it is this idea that we are somehow not the same. And yet, really, when you think about what a professor does and what a K-12 teacher does, it's the same thing. We teach. It's just the only difference is the age of the student is different. Higher ed, the students are older. So it seems to make sense to me that what we need to be doing is working together to conduct research. They have a lot of the things that we need. They being the classroom teacher, the K-12 teacher, has a lot of the tools that we need. And I think it's a partnership opportunity that their time has come. It's very hard to do research these days. It's hard to find permission, get permission from principals to have students participate in a research study. So what happens is when you can find a classroom teacher who's willing to help you, willing to allow you to use their classroom, you have a built-in research site. And so this presentation is going to look at developing partnerships for the purpose of conducting research. We're going to talk about some of the things that you have to do to establish a partnership, some things to remember in order to make the research partnership effective and successful, as well as we're going to talk a little bit about the research process itself. So I'm looking forward to presenting this, and what I want to do at this outset is to kind of identify who is in the audience right now. So if you're a higher ed professor, someone who teaches in teacher ed or teaches in the university, I want you to raise your hand. So I'm going to look around to see who has their hands raised. If you're in higher ed, you're a professor, go ahead and raise your hand so that I can see how many of you are out there in that area. So let's look around. Okay. Seeing some hands. Great. Thank you. Welcome to Baguio City, one of my favorite places to go, especially after being in Tarlac a few weeks ago. I always like to go to Baguio, and so hopefully the weather's much cooler there for you today than wherever it is that you come from. Now, for the rest of you, how many of you are K-12 teachers? Because I have been told that some in the audience are going to be K-12 teachers. So if you're a K-12 teacher, go ahead and raise your hand so that we can kind of all see who is here in the audience today. So let's look around the room and see who's who. Okay. Thank you for participating in that little brief survey. I appreciate Dr. Ladja arranging this little very intimate setting for this particular workshop. And so, hey, Dr. Ladja, it was good seeing you a few weeks ago. when I was in Tarlac. I've been in Manila. Last week I was in Manila, and this week I have returned to the United States. So it's good to see you again, and certainly send me those pictures from the 50s Diner, one of my favorite places to eat in Baguio. So let's get on with the presentation. It's not a surprise to most academics, whether you're in the K-12 or in higher education, that research is a requirement for any kind of promotion that you would want, whether it be that initial promotion to tenure and then maybe an assistant professor or instructor, all the way up to full professor. And it's the same with K-12 for those who want to grow past being that teacher 1, teacher 2, teacher 3, all the way up to master teacher. There is going to be a requirement for teachers to conduct research. And I think it's a fantastic change in our K-12 system, because it's forcing teachers to look at some of the challenges in their classrooms and look at it in a very systematic way, because that's really what research is examining a problem, but doing it in a systematic way that other people can follow, and should they follow that plan, they'll come up with similar results. So it's part of the process that we all go through in whether it's higher ed or in K-12. And I think it makes just the most sense that we find a way to partner professors and classroom teachers together to conduct research, because in teacher education, we're telling future teachers how they should conduct their classroom. Well, if these professors have not been in a classroom in some years, then they don't have a lot of credibility, in my thinking, for solving problems in the classroom. So unless they're conducting research on a regular basis and that they know that the strategies that they're telling teachers to implement actually work, I don't see that they have much credibility. So this is a way that we can bring higher ed and teacher education at the K-12 level together in a way that benefits both professor and teacher. But of course the question comes down to, why do this? Everybody's busy. Classroom teachers have lots of preparations that they have to give every week, and professors have a very heavy schedule with committee work and classes to be taught and meetings to attend. So the question is, why is this a good idea? Well, I think it's a win-win for everybody. First, classroom teachers, K-12 teachers, have a built-in research site where we can actually conduct research fairly easy. We have access to a population of students. We have a place where we can actually implement these ideas and see the impact without harming students, without really interrupting the flow of learning that's taking place. Secondly, higher ed faculty, they know how to do research. They've had to do research for their dissertations, so they're experienced, where the classroom teacher may not be, that higher ed faculty member is. And so they can work together to conduct the research, and that classroom teacher will learn about research, as well as the higher ed faculty will learn about the realities of those K-12 classes. Number 3, K-12 teachers have access to the data that we need, not only the participants that would be a part of the study that we're doing, but they also have data that we need, demographic data, they have test data. So there's a lot of information that they can provide to that higher ed faculty member to help conduct the research. And number 4, of course, both sides benefit from this when we network, because what we're doing is we're resolving problems that are taking place in those classrooms. We're reducing them, if not eliminating them. And then our knowledge base is increased in education, and that's really the indicator of whether something is a profession or not, is what kind of knowledge base does it have. So we're constantly adding to that knowledge base when we conduct research. And let's face it, there are a lot of challenges facing classrooms, whether it be attendance or achievement issues or particular strategies that work with students that have certain disabilities. There is an environment there that really gives us an opportunity to address these problems and hopefully add to what we understand about what good teaching looks like, and then it can be transmitted to other teachers to try out those same strategies. But of course the question comes down to, why do this? Everybody's busy. Classroom teachers have lots of preparations that they have to give every week, and professors have a very heavy schedule with committee work and classes to be taught and meetings to attend. So the question is, why is this a good idea? Well, I think it's a win-win for everybody. First, classroom teachers, K-12 teachers, have a built-in research site where we can actually conduct research fairly easy. We have access to a population of students. We have a place where we can actually implement these ideas and see the impact without harming students, without really interrupting the flow of learning that's taking place. Secondly, higher ed faculty, they know how to do research. They've had to do research for their dissertations, so they're experienced, where the classroom teacher may not be, that higher ed faculty member is. And so they can work together to conduct the research, and that classroom teacher will learn about research, as well as the higher ed faculty will learn about the realities of those K-12 classes. Number 3, K-12 teachers have access to the data that we need, not only the participants that would be a part of the study that we're doing, but they also have data that we need, demographic data, they have test data. So there's a lot of information that they can provide to that higher ed faculty member to help conduct the research. And number 4, of course, both sides benefit from this when we network, because what we're doing is we're resolving problems that are taking place in those classrooms. We're reducing them, if not eliminating them. And then our knowledge base is increased in education, and that's really the indicator of whether something is a profession or not, is what kind of knowledge base does it have. So we're constantly adding to that knowledge base when we conduct research. And let's face it, there are a lot of challenges facing classrooms, whether it be attendance or achievement issues or particular strategies that work with students that have certain disabilities. There is an environment there that really gives us an opportunity to address these problems and hopefully add to what we understand about what good teaching looks like, and then it can be transmitted to other teachers to try out those same strategies. Establishing a research partnership from higher ed to K-12 does take a little bit of work to do. It's not just something that's going to happen. It's something that you're going to have to put some effort into. Now, there are 3 things that I want you to keep in mind as you establish a partnership. And I would say first and foremost, before you think of these 3 things, I want you to think about where you might do this research and really understand what you might want to do. All right, have that in mind before you get out there and go find a school. I would say first, look at proximity. Now think about where you work, where you live. Finding a school in the Philippines within your work area, your living area, it's probably not going to be that hard to do. But if you don't know any teachers at that particular school, you may have a bit of a challenge because you're just going to walk up to a school and say, hey, I'd like to do a study, and can you connect me with a classroom teacher who might be willing to participate? So I think that the key is, before you ever think about proximity, you may have to think about, well, who do I know at a K-12 school that I could work with, or do I know a principal who might recommend somebody, or a superintendent? So having thought about that and having found a school, then the next thing is to look at that proximity, because if you're choosing a place that is too far from where you live, you're going to make this process even harder. So if you live in the Tarlac area, then possibly a school in Horona might work, but then you've got to think about getting up to that location, a jeepney getting you there, or your own personal vehicle if you have that, and then thinking about your work schedule and that teacher's schedule, and finding a time when you can both connect. So proximity is important. You might want to choose a school closer to you so that it is easier for you to connect. For instance, you may agree that, well, hey, listen, we're going to meet at Starbucks at SM in Tarlac, or we're going to meet in Capas, or we're going to meet in, if you live in the Baguio area, we're going to meet at the 50s Diner, or wherever it may be, or I think like the University of the Cordilleras. So think about location. Where can you meet that's convenient for all parties of this partnership? Because a partnership is an equal relationship. Both of you have to get something out of the relationship and give something into the relationship, and it has to be balanced. Number 2, think about compatibility. Now, when you're working with somebody in a partnership, you want to work with somebody that is compatible with your personality and you get along with, that maybe has a similar work ethic, so that they really are taking this serious. So it's not just you doing all the work and they're kind of just along for the ride. Think about your work style. If you tend to work late at night and that works well for you, does the person that you're working with have that same style, or are they an early riser and they want to work in the morning? Well, for many studies that may be possible, but if there are cases where you do need to meet, you have to find someone who is able to meet your schedule, has a very similar kind of work habit. Thirdly, think about some of the similarities in your background, because that's going to determine to a great degree the type of study that you do. So think about your background. Was your background elementary or secondary if you're in higher ed? So that if you're a higher ed faculty, you're probably not going to want to do a study in an elementary classroom. I mean, it doesn't say you can't, but that probably means that you're going to want to stick to somebody in the higher ed, one of the area disciplines. So it may be, history or languages or science or math or something like that. Also, think about the education that this person has. Are they a beginning teacher? Are they someone with a large amount of experience? Again, looking to match yourself. It's almost like you're going on one of those dates where you want to find somebody that's really a lot like you that you can feel comfortable with, because that's going to help this partnership to be really successful. So look for ways that you have a similar background, kind of a similar philosophy, a similar perspective on education. Think about the compatibility. That's the personality of you and this other person, because you can't research with somebody you don't like or don't like to be around. And then lastly, don't forget that whole issue of proximity, how close you are to one another, so that you can actually do this work. I strongly encourage you to develop some kind of partnership agreement. Now, I'm not thinking of a contract with whereases and wherefores, but a document that outlines the terms of the partnership. And you can make it as specific as you feel that it needs to be, but it should be somewhat formal. And there are 3 aspects to this agreement that I think are important. The first part of it should describe the responsibilities of each member of the partnership. And I know it might sound like I'm talking about two people, but it could be a partnership between three people or four. But describe the responsibilities of each person and list their name. Roberto will do this, and Elena will do this, and be specific about what is to be done. And it should be encompassing. It should include all of the things that are going to take place to conduct this research. So Elena, the classroom teacher, is going to get permission from the principal, and a copy is going to be, a copy of the letter granting permission to do the study is going to be given to the Professor Juan at the university, so that there's a copy maintained. Juan will make sure that the ethical requirements are met, so that they're going to go through the institutional review process for the university and make sure all of those things are done, so that participants are protected as they are part of this study and they know what their rights are. So outline or describe those responsibilities. Second, I would determine the deadlines, and this is important, just to have deadlines so everybody knows when they have to have their part of this research finished. When are things going to be done? So that it seems like deadlines help people get things done by a certain date, and people need deadlines. They need to kind of know, when do I have to have this done by? Otherwise, they just put it off because there are other priorities in their life. So I encourage you to establish deadlines and write them out in this agreement. This is when we'll have this done by. Doesn't mean you can't go back and change it. This isn't something that's written in stone. It's written on paper, which means it is perfectly acceptable to adjust it as needed. And then thirdly, in your agreement, schedule the times you're going to meet. You're going to meet every Thursday at 7 o'clock at the Starbucks, or I'm going to we're going to have dinner at Ichi-chan in Tarlac, one of my favorite restaurants, or Maotatina's. Whichever restaurant it is, or whichever place it is, you're going to set up those meetings ahead of time. Now, that doesn't mean they can't be canceled because of things that come up, because we all have busy lives, and I understand that there are times when they have to be rescheduled. But do your best to schedule these meetings out so that you know that you're going to be at this place, and all of the people in your life understand that on this Thursday or this day of the week, I'm going to be staying in Tarlac, I'm going to be in wherever, and I'm going to be meeting, and I'm not going to be interrupted. I'm not going to be home till 9 o'clock, and have that set aside. And you'll find that makes this a much easier process when everybody agrees. And when I have worked with partners on research, and I'm working on one right now with a partner, we have set these meetings up so that it really forces us to say, hey, you know what? No matter what's going on in our life, I'm going to make sure that I am at this meeting, and that way I can put it in my calendar and nothing is going to interrupt it. So have this agreement, sign it. I think that's a good thing, that both of you agree that this is what you're going to do, and then make sure everybody gets a copy of this agreement and hang on to it for your files. Not saying you're going to take them to court over this agreement, but it will eliminate some of the confusion that can happen when people are networking and people are partnering together. In addition to the partnership agreement, I suggest you actually develop a research plan. And this is the document that will be really a working document. It's the thing that you're going to use to produce the research. And so it really begins with a definition of the problem. And this is where you both sit down and say, this is the problem that we're saying. This is what's going on in the classroom. This is the name that we're going to put to this problem, and the impact that this problem is having on the classroom. Basically, you're answering the question, why is this situation a problem? And being able to clarify how this condition is impacting student performance in the classroom, student learning, that's critical in this plan. Because if you don't understand what it is that you're really trying to do, you may go off on a tangent and not really address the central problem. And this is where you identify your research question for those that are looking at maybe a more formalized plan. This is where you would outline that research question, the guiding question that you're going to answer as a result of your data collection. It would be a hypothesis if we were looking at a quantitative approach to doing research. But this is where that is. This is also the place where you explain how this problem in general impacts student learning. Then, after you've defined the problem, I encourage you to do some reading, and that is to go online and look at what others have said about this problem, whether it be truancy in the classroom. What's been going on in other countries as it relates to this particular problem? Are there any particular approaches that other countries are using, other school districts in the Philippines are using to reduce the impact of this problem? Because this is where you're going to get your ideas. Now, you may have an idea that you want to try. Well, I can almost guarantee you that someone else has tried that solution already, and it may have worked for them. And so it's going to give you encouragement, inspiration to go ahead and try it for yourself because others have tried it. Or you may have an idea for something to do in the classroom to resolve a problem, and then find by doing some reading, other people have tried that with a very similar challenge, and it didn't work. So that may encourage you, don't waste your time with that particular treatment, that particular solution, because it's not going to work, or it may not work. Then after you've done some reading, you can then choose a solution that you would like to try to resolve the problem that's impacting your classroom. And again, keeping in mind that you may not be eliminating the problem, you may be just reducing the impact that problem is having on student learning. I would also encourage you to identify the methods that you're going to use to address this problems, and be very specific, step-by-step plan. First thing I did was this, and then the next thing was this, and the next thing was this. And the reason is because other people need to be able to replicate what you've done. In other words, they need to be able to implement the same plan to see if they get the same or similar results. Remember, that's what adds to the validity of your solution, is that, you know what, other people tried it and it worked. Or in your case, you may be replicating something that others have done, and if you follow their plan, you should get the same results. If you don't, then you need to do some investigation. Maybe you have a different population that you're doing or using, or you didn't implement the plan exactly as they had outlined it. So it's really critical for you to identify the methods that you're using, whether they're original to you or methods that you're using from somebody else, to identify those. Then a part of your research plan is always obtaining permission. Now, I know some people say it's a lot easier to get forgiveness than it is to get permission, but I encourage you to get permission, and this is both from the higher ed level as well as at the K-12 school. The principal of the school should know exactly what's being done in research in his or her school. Now, in some districts, they have an office at the regional level that oversees research being conducted in the schools, and so you may have to get permission from them as well. So again, this is where the classroom teacher may know a lot more than higher ed, in that they know the people they've got to talk to get permission to do the study, and you want that permission in writing so that you have that document to say, I have approached the right people to do this study, and they have granted the permission to do it. So this is your plan. This is what you're going to implement, and I think having it written down on paper will help you to have a very systematic approach to conducting your research. Plus, much of this information will be needed when you write up your findings at the end. Now, I want to give a word or two here about qualitative versus quantitative methodologies, because what I have found in my work in the Philippines over now 14 years is that there seems to be some confusion. And so what I'm seeing is a lot of mixed studies. And that's not saying that you can't do a mixed study. I'm just telling you that I have found that most mixed studies are poorly constructed studies. And I think a lot of the problem seems to be rooted in this misunderstanding of what qualitative and or quantitative. Now, I know that there are professors who are telling their students that you must have a quantitative portion as well as a qualitative portion in the study. I'm telling you that that is not necessary. And very few people can do a good job of doing both qualitative and quantitative. And here's my reason for telling you this. Not to say that these professors don't know what they're doing. Not at all. And I'm not here to point fingers or to make people look bad or anything like that. What I'm telling you is that qualitative approach, quantitative approaches are very different. So think about this nebulous problem that you're having in your classroom, and you're really trying to get an understanding of what this problem is. You see the impact in the student grades or in their learning, their achievement. So there are two basic approaches to looking at problems. The first approach, and this is the order in which I would do them, is a qualitative approach first, because the goal of qualitative research is to just understand the problem, to get a handle on the significance of this problem, how it impacts specific populations, and to really say, I understand some of the forces that are causing this. So I'm thinking of truancy. What is involved in truancy? Is it just a student not showing up for school? Is there a parental dimension to this? Is there a societal dimension to this? Is there a geographic dimension to it? Economic, and so forth. So qualitative research just wants to understand the scope of the problem and be able to document the scope of this problem so that at some point quantitative approaches can be used, which says, okay, what we want to do is resolve this problem, or we want to reduce the impact of this problem, so we're going to try treatment Z. We think that's the treatment that's going to cause this problem not to be a problem anymore. But you see, you can't just choose treatments unless you understand the problem. What's actually going on? Why are students truant? Why don't students come to school? Why don't students seem to understand this particular content in my concept? It's a math concept. Why don't they get this concept? Why are these 15 students not doing well in history or in English language class or Filipino class? Why aren't they doing well when these other 25 or 30 students are doing fantastic? What's going on? So the quantitative approach says, okay, let me try this solution. Now that I kind of understand how this problem works, let me try a solution and see if it has a positive impact on the problem, i.e. that it's reducing that problem. And if it doesn't, well, I'm going to try something else. But I'm going to look at the literature. I'm going to look at the research journals that talk about whatever problem it is and see what people have done to see if there is a solution that has some history of working. So you see, I think that you need to have both of these approaches. Sometimes it's even important to do a qualitative study, especially if you're dealing with a problem that seems to be rather unique to your school. It's not a problem that's very common throughout the Philippines. Well, then you may need to do a qualitative approach, where you're trying to get a better handle on the problem, and then do a quantitative study to actually reduce it. But when you're dealing with problems that are across the board, ones that people have had for many years now, and it's not only just limited to the Philippines, but it takes place in the United States, it takes place in Europe, then you may be able to just go and do a quantitative approach and try some strategies that others have tried to reduce the impact of it. Now that you've developed your plan, it's time to implement your plan. And this, of course, begins with the treatment itself, where you've identified the participants of your study. It's the third grade classroom at this particular school, or it's a subset of a particular classroom, that students who are struggling with this particular strategy. So you've identified your participants, you've defined that problem, and now you're ready to implement a treatment that you've identified from the research. And so whether it's small group work, or you're going to give them some additional accommodations or remediations, whatever the treatment is, you implement your treatment. Then you measure to see if there's any improvement, and whatever instruments you've identified that you're going to use, whether it's an end of chapter test or a standardized test or a teacher made test, whatever it is, you're going to give the assessment. And then gather the data from each of the participants and chart their responses on whatever document you're using, whether you're going to look at their test scores and you're going to look at their raw data, or you're going to look at their percentile rank, whatever it is. You're going to measure, then gather that data, and then analyze the data. And of course, if you're using a quantitative approach, then you'll probably use some kind of statistical analysis. And a lot of people look at the mean and they look at frequency. Others will use some more advanced statistical methodologies, such as ANOVAs, or they might look at correlational strategies, such as Pearson R, or other types of correlational statistical analysis. So whatever you use for that, that's the place where you're going to then apply the statistical test to see if your treatment is the cause of the improvement or the reduction in the problem. Now, of course, if you're doing a qualitative study, then you're probably not going to be doing a treatment, most likely, but you are going to be gathering data. You're going to make some observations. You're going to interview people to get their opinion. You're going to conduct surveys, and you're going to tabulate those results, and then identify, this is in the analysis part, the identifying of themes that you see over and over again in your data. And then you can, the last step, whether qualitative or quantitative, you can then begin to draw conclusions about the data. You're going to look at this data and say, well, based on this data, it seems like treatment A worked. Or based on the data I've seen, it seems like this problem has some aspects that are home issues, so that if we try treatments, we need to try things that are focused on the home, focused on the parents. For instance, truancy. There is a lot of research that suggests that much of the challenge with truancy is not with the student, but with the parents, making sure students are prepared and ready to go to school. So this is one of those opportunities where you start to look at that data and say, okay, this is what the data means. And these are the things that I need to do in order to continue to reduce this problem. So this is your implementation. You've developed a plan, now you've implemented the plan, and all that's left to do at this point is to write up your findings. Now, when you have some good news, you don't want to keep it to yourself. And when you've conducted research, you certainly don't want to keep it to yourself, and that's why it's important for you to publish your findings. because you're not doing research for the sake of doing research. You are doing research to add to what we know about learning about education. You're adding to the educational knowledge base. And so it's important for you to take what you've learned from your study, from your investigation of a particular problem, and publish it in some kind of academic journal that other people can read and again benefit from. So there are many journals out there. I think probably in the neighborhood of about 100,000 journals, and many of these journals are online journals. But here's one that you might look at. This particular journal, the Journal of Education and Social Policy, has both a written and an online version of it. And you can see the information about the journal right there, the ISSN number, as well as their website. And it's just not www, just type in jespnet.com and it will take you right to them. From what I can tell on this journal, now I have not published in it, but I think if you go to their website at the jespnet.com website, you'll find a lot of information about the kinds of research studies that they publish. It looks like it's a relatively established journal, so that it has some credibility. It is an indexed journal, and it's indexed with Cabell's and I think even EBSCOhost and several others, and it's trying to get some indexing with Scopus and even some of the other ones besides that. So it's, I think, a well-respected journal, and they would probably look very favorably on your study because it's studies related to education. And it's at the K-12 level as well as higher ed. So this is one place that you can try to get your work published. And again, it's international, so it's not just in the Philippines, it's international, which would certainly increase the respectability of your work there. So certainly publish your findings. It's not easy to publish your findings. This is where you write up everything. There is a format that most of the research studies follow, and it's basically a 4-section approach. The first section is called the introduction, and this is where you talk about the problem, the significance of the problem, kind of identify your hypothesis, your research question. And then there is a literature section where you look at what others have said about the problem, potential solutions for the problem that you're going to look at using, and of course this is in that section is where you talk about why you're using that particular solution. The third part deals with the methodology. That's where you write down what you did step by step by step. And the final section is your discussion, which often includes the conclusion. Some formats also say we separate discussion and conclusion. If that's the case, remember that your discussion is where you just present your data. You don't comment on it. You just say, this is what I found, this is what the results were. And then in a separate section, you talk about your conclusions. Based on that data, this is what I think needs to be done. It depends on the journal. You can look at this one and see how they outline it. But in many cases, there will be a results. They may call it results, where you talk about your findings and your conclusions. So again, you just have to look at the journals. Each one is a little bit different when it comes to that. So you publish your findings. That's the most important part of this process here. It's not just the partnership, which I think is important, but it's also getting your ideas out for others to read. Well, now that we've looked at the idea of collaborative partnerships for the idea of conducting research, key ideas that come out of this is that, number one, partnerships don't just happen. They take work to develop. And if you find a partner that you can write with and research with, you have found somebody that's very near and dear to your heart, because not everybody who says, hey, I want to be your partner, is able to handle it and does a good job of it. Believe me, I have gone through several people who said, oh, Dr. Davis, I want to research with you, conduct research with you, and then they don't do their part, and I end up having to do it all myself. So when you find someone that can really work well with you, then hang on to them. Secondly, we looked at some of the partnership basics, so thinking about proximity and compatibility and similarity. Those are also very, very critical to establishing a strong partnership. And then looking at the research that's going to be done. Remember the research agreement, where you identify who does what and the deadlines that will be met, as well as any meetings that will take place. But that research plan goes into the meat of the study. Remember, that's the thing that outlines the problem, the hypothesis that you're going to operate under, and eventually either accept or reject. Or the research question, if you're doing a qualitative study, that's going to guide your research. And then the methodology that you will outline to actually conduct the study. Don't forget where we talked about implementation, where you actually do the study itself. And this is probably going to rest more heavily on the classroom teacher, especially if you're implementing particular strategies, small group things, or maybe a remediation of some kind, where that classroom teacher is probably going to be doing that remediation. So a partnership is an equal relationship. Everybody has to get something out of it. Everybody puts something into it. So that's what makes it work, is when everybody does what they're supposed to do. Well, I've enjoyed spending this half hour or so with you, and I hope that the rest of the time that you're in Baguio is just awesome. There are a lot of great places to eat, a lot of things to see. If you haven't been to Baguio before, then certainly get up to Mines View or Burnham Park and get to the market downtown. A lot of great places to shop if you haven't done that already. Enjoy the cool weather in Baguio. I look forward to seeing you at a future Enlightened Group for Quality and Excellence in Education Conference. There'll be some next year in 2020, and I plan to be at those. So look for the publicity on those particular events. And I hope that you have a great school year that's just begun. I hope it's an awesome school year for you. Take care now. Bye-bye.